and welcome to this uni course video. My name is Ashley and the topic of today's session is analysing the need for development. Now this session follows on from the first session on performance management in a series. That was the introduction to performance management. If you would like a little bit more of a background information to this session, have a little look at that in the playlist. But this session aims to examine how the internal and external environment in which the organisation operates determines how skills, knowledge and behaviours are needed to achieve the organisational vision or strategy, goals or objectives. So basically we are going to look at how you assess what needs to be done in relation to people, performance, individuals and organisations. Okay, so we're going to go back to just defining performance management. Now bearing in mind that managers and leaders have different expectations about what they want regarding development and support and what they expect from their workplace really. Now I've pointed out two definitions here from ACAS, which they're a recognised governing body who the main focus and purpose is to improve organisation and workplaces through the promotion of strong action really. And they point out that it is a continuous process, and I've said that a couple of times in the first session, and it is a continuous process, and it involves making sure that employee performances contributes to the department's goals or the team goals and the organisational goals as well, and maybe one long-term strategic goal even. And the aim is to continuously improve performance of individuals so as to improve efficiency and effectiveness of the organisation. But moving back onto what I said about the expectations, it's okay when individuals' expectations and those of the organisations are are both the same, but difficulties might arise when there's an imbalance. So it's important to consider expectation management when considering performance management here as well. And let me give you a little example of that before moving forward. If funding for training and development is limited in an organisation, people might not be able to undertake the training and development that they might like. And alternatively, if an individual does not want that training, hasn't got the time or anything, but the organisation wants the individual to undergo further training, this could also cause a conflict. So it's, when you're analysing the need for development, this needs to be taken into consideration, because it is a management challenge to balance the requirements of both the organisation and the individual, while, being fair and, distributing the development opportunities really. So how do we make an assessment? Now we can focus this in two different areas really. You can focus it on the individual and you can then focus it on the organisation, and we're going to have a little look at that in a little bit more detail moving forward. How do we go about making an assessment? Okay, so let's think about this in two different ways. You've got your formal assessment, and then you've got your informal assessment as well. So let's think about that in a little bit more detailed. Assessment is a method of measuring performance. So let's just point that out straight away. It's a measure. It's a way of measuring performance, and the difference between formal and informal performance assessment is usually formal assessment is pre-planned. Informal assessment can be done at any time informally, and there's no standards and no clear guidelines or criteria for recording the results really. Formal assessment is conducted where there's a set of criteria by the leader, the manager, the organisation, and it's used in order to judge the calibre of the employee or the learner based on a particular instruction or subject area given to form the assessment. Now, think about this, if you even think about it as, you're a candidate applying for a job even before you actually start, and you think, okay, well, the formal assessment might be, you completing a diagnostic test before, it might be you you complete a presentation, and that could be scored on confidence or presentation style or organization, so that them set standards could even be put in place before an employee's even started. So think about um think about the formal and informal assessment could just be giving feedback on performance as they're going, um informal meetings or catch-ups, and just bearing in mind that formal is usually, as I just mentioned before, formal is usually logged, it's usually recorded, informal is not. So you've got to think of the pros and cons to that. If you can record everything in relation to performance assessments, then you'll be able to see whether they're going, up or whether they're going down. But if you're more of a, if your performance management process is more informal, then how will you know where people are? What if they're, just sitting on a line and not going up or going down or whatever? You're not pushing or challenging people to get them going up and higher. Thinking about performance management systems and processes and activities, they do not act alone. They're part of an overall management system that, sets out, it delivers, it measures, it monitors, and reviews performance as well. So it can be, it can be broken down. It can be broken down into sections, and this is the first part is the assessment section. So how do we set the standards? How do we set the standards, not for the individual, but how do we understand where the current state is before you start assessing? Now, if you was to do an internal analysis of the organization, it will give you some insight into, how the processes, how the systems operate, and the people that you've got in the place. And we'll go into that in a bit more detail in a second when we look at a SWOT that looks at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But you can look at where you are now and how you can streamline that. And then you can look at the external environment, so influences that are impacting on your organisation that you might not even have any, or control over, but you might be able to prepare for any sort of impact on the organisation by doing that external analysis. So let's just point out the assessment methods, and then we'll go into the internal and the external analysis in a little bit more detail. So you've got a couple of different assessment methods, okay? So think about a diagnostic assessment, which, that can be done on an induction, or, it could be done before people even start in a workplace. And that diagnostic can be subject specific based on their job description or the personal specification as well. Then you have formative assessments, which are done sort of maybe throughout the year, and then maybe you may have a summative assessments that's done at the end of the year, like in maybe an appraisal format, for example, an annual appraisal. But the formative assessment would include providing feedback or actions throughout the year maybe, and then the summative assessment might be done at the end. So it's given feedback informally basically, and assessing an individual's performance throughout a specific time frame. And again, the summative assessment is more of a final assessment that's usually graded on a specific set of criteria. Then you've got episative, I always struggle with that word, I don't know why, assessment, and this is an approach to an employee or a learner progress that covers a wide range of assessments and it's a feedback process, and it measures, the progress of the individual, the development, and it's a full rounder way of assessing a person, basically. Then you've got your the norm referenced assessment, and it's a type of standardized test that compares, the employees or the learners performance against another. So it's a little bit of like a forced ranking exercise that compares. And you see there's a lot in like sales organizations, or in schools, when the from this assessment, they maybe put people into categories or sets, like set 1, set 2, set 3. But we'll go into tools and techniques in performance management, and we're going to touch on forced ranking in the next session. Okay, so we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. So watch that one if you want to learn a little bit more about that. And then, you've got the criteria referenced assessments, and these are more formalized. Sometimes it's more of like a quality, it's a lot in standardization and quality tracking in organizations as well, and it's not just a tick box exercise. It's based on specifics, really. Okay, so let's talk about external assessment first. Now, you might not be involved in strategy. You might not be involved in analysing the external environment of an organisation. You might not have even seen a pestle analysis before that looks at, the political, economical, social, legal, and environmental influences that can impact on an organisation. That's perfectly fine. If you're a line manager who deals with performance management and you don't deal with strategy, it's completely understandable that you might not have seen this process or this tool used before. But it's important to understand that performance management and the need for specifics in an organisation might come from an external analysis. So yeah, when you're analysing the needs for development, you may find that, for example, if the organisation has done a pestle analysis, or if they ask you to do one, if they ask the marketing team to do one, it might be that there's a new technology out there that's, that's something that you need to be aware of and you need to be trained upon. And, that might then influence your performance management process and the way that you work based on that external influence on the organisation. So I'm just going to touch on a pestle analysis. If you want to know a little bit more about how to use a pestle analysis, and the link it has to performance management and the impact it has on an organisation and meeting the goals and objectives, we do have a video specifically on how to use a pestle analysis, so have a look in the playlist for that. But think about it. There's political influences, there's economical influences, social, technological, legal, and environmental influences that can impact on an organisation. And if they do impact on an organisation, then they're going to impact on you leading your teams and managing the performance of your teams. Another example could be if you're thinking about, corporate social responsibility, or, if you're thinking about your carbon footprint, if you're thinking about, how you can be a little bit more sustainable in your current work and practices. It might be that a new conference is coming up, an industry specific conference on environmental issues in your specific area, that you might decide that you want to send every single person on your team to, so they can be a little bit more about sustainable practices within the workplace. So it's important to be able to understand what a pestle is. And if you're not in charge of strategy and assessing the current state of the organisation and planning for the future, that's perfectly fine. But you might be asked to provide information on the current state of your internal capabilities to be able to respond to an external assessment. And yeah, it is a strategic analysis tool, but as a line manager or an ops manager or a process manager, a people manager, it is important to be aware of how the external environment can impact on an organisation. Now let's look at internal assessment. So as a line manager, it is important for you to be fully aware of how to internally assess your department or your team, or how your department's meeting the goals and objectives. So if you look at the SWOT analysis framework, the most simple, the most common, the most popular framework that can be used for an individual and for a department or a team is the SWOT analysis framework. You're going to be looking at the strengths of the individual or of the team. I mean, you can even do this on a specific process or product if you wanted to. But it looks at the positive, tangible and intangible attributes, internal and within the organisation's control. So you're thinking about, there is something that you can do about this. You can pull from the strengths and utilise them as much as you possibly can, to be as efficient and effective. And if you do a SWOT analysis on an individual, and through looking at maybe the CV and one-to-one discussions with them and reviews and appraisals, you find that there's something that's a strength that they have that you're not utilizing for maybe a different project. You could be missing out there, and that could be an opportunity. So it's important to be able to try and do a reflective account. I have in the past, when managing people, I've asked people to complete a SWOT analysis themselves, and then I've went with them, and and this was in a one-to-one review, and then I've sat with them and talked through. I said, oh, I didn't know that you found that this was a weakness. I didn't find this a weakness. I thought that. Or you might find that there's some weakness that they have. You might have someone who's it's their strength, and they might just be able to work with them and shadow them for a little bit to get that weakness up to a strength capacity. So it's a really good framework to use. And again, there's a video specifically on how to use a SWOT analysis to be able to do an internal assessment on your team, on your individuals, to be able to consider their capabilities, and also be able to plan for any threats or weaknesses to be able to improve the individual or the team. And I know this is a really wordy slide, but it really does break down what we mean when we look at strengths and weaknesses. So it looks at, for the strengths, what value, proposition and advantages do you have that rival your competitors. Now this looks at it from a departmental or an organisation's perspective, but think about things like resources and assets, people, skills, capabilities, competitive advantage, internal processes. Now think about it, if you've got a really good HR, ops, supply management chain, if you've got everything that's working swimmingly, and your staff are probably going to be happy. And if your staff are happy, you can upskill them. And if you upskill them, will you have the most competitive staff? And if you do have the most competitive staff, will that give you a competitive advantage? Bearing in mind, as I mentioned in the last session, people are the most valuable asset for an organisation. The people that you have in the organisation, the ones that make it successful. So making sure that you value them as much as possible is really important. And when you look at weaknesses, when you compare and contrast, you can think about when you're looking at resources and assets, the core activities, the reliability, the cash flow, technology, is it dated, for example? Is there any skill gaps in the people? And that's where performance management comes in. So yeah, have a little look in a little bit more detail. You might want to pause this slide and have a look in a little bit more detail at this one. The next, and probably one of the most popular, the most popular analytical tools to use here is a gap analysis. It's one of the most traditional methods of identifying training needs, and it's particularly appropriate for certain procedures and processes for manual work, and for actionable work, really. It can quickly establish gaps in performance. So there's a couple of different areas to focus on here. So a gap analysis can be used to not just look at the people, but you can look at the processes and the way they're running, the technology and any problems. And there's a couple of models, when you're looking at problems or issues, there's a couple of models that you can use, say in project management, or to get to the, to get to the key area and the key issue, and then be able to elaborate further on how to develop, improve, train, whatever needs to be done to improve. So basically getting from the current state to the desired state by putting together an action plan. And if you're looking at analysing the needs for development, it might not just come from an individual. It might come because a process isn't working no more, and you may need to, look at the development of the team to be able to adapt a process to make it a little bit more better, to make it, maybe minimize waste, maybe become more environmentally friendly, maybe become more sustainable, maybe just keep up to trends with current technology. So there's a number of different reasons why you'd use a gap analysis, and there's plenty of models. But I'd just like to point out firstly how it can help. So, okay, firstly, yeah, it will help you to identify and to understand how to prioritize needs. It can add value to your work. Obviously, identifying any sorts of issues or problems and being able to fix them will always add value. But identifying them deficiencies and shortcomings can help you to overcome issues and problems and come over the other side, really. And it's just taking that step to uncover them problems and issues, and addressing them, and putting a plan together to be able to work, work more efficiently, work more effectively, work smarter, not harder. So one of the models that I really like, is the 7D gap analysis model. Now, it's usually used in projects, but it consists of finding the reasons for a mistake, a problem or a fault, and then assessing the role that training can play in improving the performance of an individual or a group or team or an organisation, really. And one of the most essential things for me is to establish, when analysing training needs, is whether or not training is actually necessary. It might just be about, fixing a process and maybe changing a few job roles, maybe slightly, just to fix a different, a situation. It would be pointless to spend money on a new, training scheme if the issue lays outside of, the training sphere, or the development sphere, really. If the faults were due to, maybe poor equipment or badly designed business processes or systems or whatever, then that just might need fixing. So gap analysis can, simply, it can establish a reason for a fault, so getting to the root cause, really. And it can also provide information as to whether, training is that the appropriate, or development for an individual or a team is the appropriate solution So the 7 areas are, when you're looking at describing the fault, you're thinking of, are there inconsistencies in the standards, or, or editing, or issues really? When you're thinking about discovering how the fault occurred, there might be mistakes in, in a specific area. So it's getting to that root cause really, to then be able to define the immediate cause. Um, and once you have defined that, it's you can then, diagnose um the effects of it. So you can then say, well, is this going to affect this department, that department? How much of an issue is it? Is it really causing us problems? Is it, better to fix it, or, is it, or do nothing? And you can think of options at that point, and then determine responsibility, and see, who the who it lies with. And if it lies with a specific person, that issue lies with a specific person, or a specific team, or a specific process, or a specific, piece of machinery, for example, then consider taking action on how to get, again, from that current state to the desired state, to fill that gap. And then it's, designing a new process or a system to set it in stone, to prevent the fault from reoccurring. So ensuring that, I think it's important to me myself, to ensure that somebody is responsible for checking, that the problem sorted out, or the training has been put through and monitored and reviewed, or whatever needs to be done is being, it's someone's responsibility to monitor and review that. So, and some people, even go on to use the Raki matrix, which looks at the responsibility and accountability, who needs to be consulted and informed. And that the Raki matrix is really good in performance management as well. Um, especially for HR departments, if they were to, have a couple of line managers dealing with different people, managing different training programs, and maybe one person's in charge of a specific training program, it might be their responsibility to make sure everybody does health and safety, for example, every couple of years, or everybody does safeguarding every year, or first aid every year. And then somebody else might be accountable for ensuring that that is done and that's being monitored. Somebody else might need to be consulted, such as the HR department, to update the records once it's being complete. And it might be that, their supervisor needs to be informed that they're conducting the course and they've completed the course, so then they can complete a risk assessment, for example. So yeah, there are a couple of more tools that can be used, and there's plenty of models in relation to performance management and gap analysis particularly. So have a little look at that in a little bit more detail. But the main thing I think that people need to focus on is, how can a gap analysis be carried out? It can be carried out regularly in an appraisal, maybe. It can be carried out on a department. It can be carried out on a team, and it can be carried out alongside a SWOT analysis or a pestle analysis, to determine the current situation, to decide on the future situation, and assess the gap, and the potential for where they want to be as an individual, or as a team, or department or organization, and where they are heading. If they do, nothing should be pointed out as well. And the main focus, and Ryan Lilly said this, the main focus of gap analysis should be getting to the other side. If you bend over to analyze a gap too long, you'll probably fall into it. So, just reviewing it, taking action, moving forward, and maybe looking at it again when it's coming to the next, um, assessment section, or, analysing section of the performance management process, or team, or individuals. So self-assessment for me, I think, is really important for the team, as having a team that is self-aware, that understands exactly where they are and take action in their own development, it just makes for, really good team members and, really good leaders in the future as well. So employee, self-rate, and so giving them, say, for example, a performance review and saying, mark yourself out of 10 on, motivation, enthusiasm, la di da di da. It's really good practice to let them reflect on their own, on how on how they feel like they're doing, for then you to be able to have an open conversation and be able to communicate with them. And that communication between um the staff members and the employees is really, really, really important, in order to be able to develop relationships, gain trust, and then to be able to get a buy-in to understand completely where about they fit within the organisational goals being met. Okay, so let's talk about some practical tips for leading the management of performance. I've noted down a couple here and some that I think that are really, really important. So thinking about how you can, lead a team for the management of performance. Think about recognizing the importance that good relationships have on the sustainable performance of individuals and teams. So think about, if your relationships are not built well, if you're not, if you're not getting along with your staff and not being approachable, then performance management isn't really going to work. And it's important to be proactive as a leader or a manager and actively engage in individuals and team problems or issues or um, objectives, to be able to give them confidence to believe that you actually care about their performance as well. And using you might want to use an appraisal. You might appraisal framework. You might want to use reward and recognition programs. There's a number of different tools and techniques that you can use. But if you do use the appraisal system in a timely manner to motivate, develop, and improve staff performance, um, it just shows that you're wanting them to, to move up, and that could also link to pay or promotion as well. And using the SMART framework, so looking at every objective that you set when managing people's performance, then being specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound, it allows you to make sure that you're not just picking it and choosing it for them, but that them targets are agreed together. And if they've got, and it might be that you say, this is what needs to be done. How do you think that we're going to do it? Well, this is how we're going to do it. And then you tell them how to break it down into a smart objective so you can measure it and, you can make sure it's achievable, realistic, and you can set a time marker on that so it can be reviewed. Um, then that's good practice as a manager as well. And don't let, the task and getting the task done um stop you from actually caring about the individual itself. So driving workers to achieve tasks without attending to relationships is where teamwork gets broken down. So thinking more about the tasks than the people completing the tasks is where, teamwork does break down. And keep motivation the top of your relationship priority list. Just remembering that a happy team, a team with good morale and, that are all focused on working towards the same goal, are the successful teams, really. So that concludes my session today on analysing the needs for development. Now, just bearing in mind that, energising people for performance elevates the success or the achievement significantly, to the point that many employees go well beyond their leaders' expectations. Okay, so that concludes our session today on analysing the need for development. And bearing in mind at the end of this session that investing in people management and people development is essential for, a good performance management system to work. Now, this is the second in our series. The next session is going to focus more on tools and techniques of performance management. So tune in for that if you want a little bit more information on appraisals, reviews, and all the other different tools and techniques that a leader or a manager can use to improve or to have a more transparent performance management system. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.